On a rainy Chicago night, inside a dimly lit bar, a woman's voice broke through the noise. Soft, urgent, trembling. "Pretend you're with me." She thought she was only hiding from a man who once controlled her life. What she didn't know was that the stranger she clung to was a billionaire drowning in his own loneliness. That single whisper would shatter two broken pasts, ignite an unexpected love, and set them on a journey that neither could walk away from. Hello, family. If you're ready for the full story, make sure you hit subscribe, and tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Tomorrow, I've got another story that will blow your mind, and trust me, you don't want to miss it. Now, let's dive in. Chicago pulsed like a restless heart that evening, the rain tapping against skyscraper windows as if trying to remind the city it was still alive. Neon signs reflected in puddles, taxis splashed through slick streets, and strangers hurried into doorways to escape the September chill. Inside one of those doorways, the Ember Lounge, a bar half hidden in the folds of downtown, Selena Carter pressed her palm against the polished wood of the counter. The room hummed with low jazz and murmured conversation. The air smelled faintly of whiskey, old oak, and rain-damp coats. It was the kind of place people slipped into when they wanted to disappear, which suited her perfectly. Selena wasn't dressed to be noticed. A simple black dress, her curls pulled into a loose bun, gold hoops that caught the low light. Yet her presence carried an undeniable gravity, the kind that comes from surviving storms. Her dark eyes scanned the room, not in search of company but in quiet defense, always assessing, always ready. She had come here telling herself it was just to escape, to hear live music, to feel like a woman in a city instead of a survivor piecing her life back together. But the truth hummed lower, beneath her ribs. She wanted to feel invisible. And invisibility was something she'd never truly been granted. Not with him still lurking in the edges of her memory. A man slid onto the stool beside her, leaning too close, and Selena's body tensed. But when she glanced up, her breath caught, not from fear, but from surprise. This man wasn't leering. He wasn't even looking at her. His gaze was somewhere far beyond the bar, somewhere she couldn't follow. Julian Hale sat like he had been carved into the room. Tall, sharp-suited, shoulders that looked like they had carried more than wealth could buy. His drink, a glass of Macallan, neat, rested untouched on the counter, condensation sliding down its side. The light caught the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, evidence of nights spent awake, years that had aged him faster than his age should allow. Julian was no stranger to luxury. Billionaire, business icon, heir to an empire, his name appeared in magazines he never read. But all the headlines and accolades meant nothing in this moment. He had come here alone, as he did on nights when the weight became unbearable. Nights when silence felt louder than noise. He thought about his sister, Lydia, every time he sipped whiskey. About the car crash that stole her life and left him gripping guilt like a second skin. His empire had only grown since then, but so had the emptiness. Money could fill rooms, but not hearts. Tonight, for the first time in months, Julian had come with a darker intention, to see if one final glass could blur him into nothingness. And then he heard it. A voice. Not loud, not commanding, but trembling, raw, human. Selena had noticed it before Julian, a figure across the room. The man's shoulders, the tilt of his head, the smirk that slithered across his face. It was him. Anthony. Her past. The man who had once convinced her she was small, fragile, unworthy. The man she had walked away from, only to find his shadow haunting her steps. Her chest tightened, and her instincts screamed to leave. But if she ran, he would win. If she froze, he would smirk. No, she would not give him the satisfaction. She needed cover. A shield. A way to stand tall when her knees wanted to collapse. That's when she saw the man beside her. The stranger with haunted eyes. He wasn't watching her. He wasn't trying to charm her. He was just there, solid, real, unbothered. And in that instant, something bold sparked inside her. Selina leaned closer, her hand trembling slightly as it brushed the edge of his sleeve. "Pretend you're with me," she whispered. Julian blinked. For a moment, he thought he imagined it. But her eyes, dark, fierce, terrified and unbroken, met his with a fire he hadn't seen in years. He didn't ask why. He didn't need to. Instinct overrode thought. He shifted closer, his arm settling protectively along the back of her chair. The movement was smooth, practiced, as though he had been waiting for someone to ask him to matter again. Selina inhaled sharply, but she didn't pull away. Together, they formed a fragile illusion, two strangers wrapped in the outline of intimacy. From across the bar, Anthony's smirk faltered. The message was clear. She was not alone. And yet, beneath the performance, something else stirred. Julian's heart, long buried under grief, stuttered awake. Her whisper had pulled him from the abyss. And for Selina, the warmth of his presence steadied her pulse, reminding her she wasn't as powerless as she feared. They were both pretending. But the electricity that passed between them was anything but false. Julian didn't know what came over him. Maybe it was the tremor in her voice. Maybe it was the way her hand brushed his sleeve as if testing whether he was real. But the moment she whispered those words, something inside him shifted. He had been drowning in silence for months, but now her voice echoed like a lifeline thrown into deep waters. "Pretend you're with me." He didn't hesitate. His body leaned toward hers, an instinct honed not from practice but from need. He slid his arm along the back of her chair, his fingers barely brushing her shoulder. To anyone watching, they looked like a couple wrapped in the kind of casual, practiced intimacy that spoke of familiarity. But for Julian, this was anything but casual. Selina felt the weight of his presence immediately. His nearness wasn't invasive, it was grounding. The warmth radiating from him steadied her heartbeat, even as Anthony's stare burned across the room like acid. She could feel it, the way his eyes tried to shrink her, tried to remind her of the nights when his control was absolute. But this time, she wasn't folding. She pressed closer into the stranger's side, her pulse racing for reasons far more complicated than fear. Julian's voice was low, almost a vibration against her ear. "Is he watching you?" She nodded, not daring to look back. "Don't turn around," she whispered. His jaw tightened. He didn't know who he was, but he knew the look in her eyes. He had seen it on his sister's face once, long ago, when Lydia had stood trembling in their father's study, refusing to cry even as anger towered over her. He knew that look. It was defiance, the fragile kind that could crumble without the right shield. And suddenly, Julian knew his role. So he played it. His arm lowered to rest against her waist, firm but careful, an anchor rather than a cage. "Then he'll believe," Julian murmured, "that you're not alone tonight." Selina swallowed hard. It was ridiculous. This was a stranger. She didn't know his name, his story, nothing. And yet, His presence felt safer than the promises Anthony had ever whispered to her in the dark. Safe and strangely electric. Anthony shifted across the room. Selina caught the movement in her peripheral vision. His smirk faltered, his brow furrowed, and then, like a wolf denied its prey, he turned back toward his drink. Relief rushed through her chest like air after being underwater too long. She let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding, her shoulders sagging slightly. Julian noticed. "Better?" he asked softly. Selina turned to him then, really looking at him for the first time. The dim light carved shadows across his features, sharp cheekbones, tired eyes that looked older than the man himself, lips pressed in a line of quiet restraint. He looked like someone used to carrying the weight of others, and yet, she hadn't expected the gentleness. "Yes," she whispered. Then, almost reluctantly, "Thank you." His lips curved, not quite into a smile, but into something real. "You don't owe me thanks. You did me a favor." That caught her off guard. "A favor?" "I was sitting here trying to forget I existed," Julian said quietly, his gaze fixed on the amber liquid in his glass. "Then you reminded me I do." For a moment, Selina didn't know what to say. His words were simple, but they carried a heaviness she recognized, the sound of someone who had known loss. They sat in silence, their bodies still close enough to keep up the illusion, but the act was beginning to blur into something else. Selina didn't pull away. Neither did Julian. The bartender slid by, raising a brow at their proximity, then asked, "Another drink for you two?" "2 whiskeys," Julian said before Selina could answer. His tone was steady, commanding in a way that suggested he wasn't used to being told no. Selina raised a brow at him. "I usually order wine." Julian's lips curved slightly. "Then tonight you'll try whiskey." Her instinct was to argue, to insist on her independence, but something about his tone made her pause. Not because it was controlling, but because it wasn't. It wasn't Anthony's suffocating grip. It wasn't a demand. It was an offering. A strange sort of challenge. When the glasses arrived, Selina lifted hers cautiously, inhaling the smoky scent. She took a sip and coughed lightly at the burn. Julian's chuckle, low, rich, unexpected, slipped out. It wasn't polished or restrained. It was real, and that laugh did something dangerous. It made her want to know him. Across the bar, Anthony had left. Selina checked once, then twice, her body finally relaxing when she was sure. "You don't have to keep pretending anymore," she said softly. Julian studied her, his gaze steady. "What if I wasn't pretending?" Her chest tightened. She wasn't ready for the weight behind his words, the honesty she hadn't expected. She turned her eyes back to her glass. The jazz band shifted into a softer melody, the kind that filled spaces with longing. Around them, couples leaned closer, laughter rose and fell, but at their corner of the bar, time seemed to slow. Julian finally extended a hand. "Julian." She hesitated before taking it. "Selina." Her name rolled through him like something sacred, as though he'd been waiting to hear it. He held her hand just a second longer than necessary, then released it. For Julian, the night had begun as another descent into numbness. But now, with her whisper still echoing in his ears, it had become something else. He didn't know why this stranger mattered, but she did. More than the drink, more than the emptiness, more than the silence. For Selina, the night had begun as another reminder that Anthony's shadow still lingered. But now, sitting beside this stranger with tired eyes and steady hands, she felt something new. Not safety exactly, not yet, but the spark of possibility. And neither of them realized that this small, trembling act, her whisper, his response, had just rewritten the course of their lives. Do you believe one small, random act of bravery, like speaking to a stranger, can truly change the direction of a life? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you're still listening, caught up in this story, don't be that person who feels everything but does nothing. Subscribe now. You'll regret missing where this story goes next. Have you ever had a single moment, a word, a glance, a choice, that changed the course of everything? Share it in the comments. And hey, before we go deeper, if you're listening and this story already has you hooked, don't just disappear like a stranger in the night. Hit subscribe, because we've got a journey ahead you won't want to miss. The night air outside the Ember Lounge carried the smell of rain-soaked pavement and exhaust fumes. Cars hissed past in the wet streets, their headlights streaking gold across puddles. Selina pulled her coat tighter around her shoulders as she stepped out, heels clicking against the slick sidewalk. She hadn't expected him to follow. "Let me walk you," Julian said, his voice calm but firm. Selina turned, meeting his gaze in the glow of the neon sign above the bar. His eyes weren't pleading, but there was something else in them, something steady, protective. For a fleeting second, she almost said yes. But her instincts flared, that familiar shield she carried everywhere. "I'm fine," she said quickly, adjusting her bag on her shoulder. "I don't need." His expression didn't shift, but he slipped his hands into his coat pockets, unfazed. "I didn't say you needed me. I said let me." Selina blinked. The phrasing threw her. She had spent years with a man who wrapped control in the disguise of concern. Julian's words carried no demand, no leash, just an offering. Still, her guard bristled. "You don't even know me," she said. Julian's lips curved faintly. "And yet you asked me first." The reminder hit her square in the chest. "Pretend you're with me." The whisper that had changed the course of the night. She had started this fragile connection, and now she didn't know how to carry it. They walked anyway. The city hummed around them, honking horns, laughter spilling from late-night diners, the thrum of the elevated train passing above. Selina kept her stride brisk, as though distance itself could dissolve the electricity still pulsing between them. "You don't have to keep doing this," she said after a block. "Doing what?" "Playing hero." Julian exhaled softly, a sound that might have been a laugh. "If that was heroism, I hate to see what you think weakness looks like." She glanced at him then, the corner of her mouth twitching. His tone wasn't arrogant. It was teasing, almost disarming. Still, she folded her arms tighter. "You don't understand. Men like Anthony, they don't just vanish. He'll be back. They always come back." Julian stopped walking, his shoes halting against the wet pavement. "Anthony," he repeated, tasting the name like it soured his mouth. Selina regretted saying it instantly. She shook her head, continuing forward. "Forget it." But Julian didn't forget. The protective heat in his chest surprised him, rising like a fire he hadn't felt in years. He wanted to ask more, to know what Anthony had done to carve that shadow into her, but he stayed silent. because he knew what it meant to live with wounds you weren't ready to display. When they reached her building, a modest walk-up with peeling paint and a flickering porch light, Selena paused at the bottom of the steps. "This is me." Julian nodded, glancing up at the crooked windows and the small garden pot tipping on the edge of the stoop. "Safe enough." Selena arched a brow. "Do you ask all your pretend girlfriends that?" It was supposed to come out biting, but instead it landed softer, almost playful. The way his mouth curved at the edges told her he heard the difference. "No," Julian said, his voice low. "Just the ones who whisper like they mean it." Her stomach tightened. She hated how easily his words slipped past her defenses. Hated more how much she didn't actually hate it. "Good night, Julian," she said, turning toward the door before he could unravel her further. "Good night, Selena." His voice followed her inside, settling into her chest long after the door closed. Julian didn't go straight back to his penthouse. He walked. Through the rain, through streets buzzing with nightlife, through his own restless thoughts. He had meant it when he told her she'd done him a favor. He hadn't planned on being alive by morning. Not really. Not with the way Lydia's face haunted him every time he closed his eyes. But that whisper, Selena's trembling need wrapped in fierce defiance, had pierced something. Reminded him of why he used to fight. Now, he found himself resisting the pull. It was dangerous, this connection. He didn't do connections. Not anymore. Not when they ended in loss. And yet, her voice lingered. Selena, meanwhile, sat on the edge of her bed, shoes kicked to the floor, her dress clinging with a faint scent of whiskey and rain. She pressed her palms against her knees, trying to steady herself. She should have known better. She shouldn't have involved a stranger in her war. But the memory of his arm around her waist, the steadiness of his presence, the way his voice had told her she wasn't alone, it replayed in her mind like a dangerous lullaby. She reminded herself of the truth. Men leave. Men disappoint. Men control. Julian was no different. He was a stranger. And strangers didn't stay. So why did her body still hum as though he hadn't just walked away? Days passed. She threw herself into work at the Community Arts Center, painting murals with children, organizing music nights, distracting herself with anything that kept her hands busy. But every time she looked up and caught her reflection in the glass, she saw the woman in the bar, the one who had whispered to a stranger and felt safe for the first time in years. Julian, too, tried to return to his life. Boardrooms, contracts, staff meetings. He spoke, nodded, signed papers. But the memory of Selena's whisper kept cutting through the monotony. Every time he picked up a pen, he remembered her hand on his sleeve. Every time he heard Lydia's voice in his mind, he remembered Selena's bravery. Both resisted the pull. Both failed. One evening, nearly a week later, fate, or something that felt like it, stepped in again. Selena was hosting a small fundraiser at the Arts Center, her voice bright as she welcomed parents and neighbors. She wore a deep green dress, her curls framing her face, her confidence a mask she'd perfected. And then she saw him, Julian, standing near the back, hands in his pockets, watching her with those same unreadable eyes. Her stomach dropped. She hadn't invited him. How had he even? Their gazes locked, and the air shifted. He nodded once, almost imperceptibly, as though to say, "I didn't forget." "Did you?" Selena's defenses rose immediately, but her heart betrayed her, racing faster than she wanted to admit. If you met someone who saved you in a single moment, would you let them back into your life, or keep your walls up? I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. And listen, don't just let this story pass you by like Julian tried to. If you're still here, that means it matters to you. Hit subscribe now. Don't resist this one good thing. The fundraiser at the Arts Center was supposed to be safe ground. Selena had poured weeks into planning it. Banners hand-painted by the kids, mismatched folding chairs borrowed from neighbors, fairy lights strung across the ceiling to disguise water stains. It wasn't glamorous, but it was hers. Her sanctuary. So when she spotted Julian Hale standing in the back corner, every muscle in her body went rigid. What was he doing here? He didn't belong in this world of plastic cups and homemade cupcakes. His charcoal gray suit looked sharper than anything the room had ever seen. Even standing still, he seemed to command space. Conversations around him faltered as people stole curious glances. Selena forced a smile for the crowd, her voice steady as she introduced the children's choir. But inside, panic simmered. She hadn't invited him. She hadn't wanted him here. And yet, a small, undeniable part of her chest warmed at the sight of him. When the choir finished their song, applause filled the room. Selena excused herself from the microphone, weaving through the crowd until she reached him. "What are you doing here?" she hissed under her breath. Julian's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "Supporting the arts." Selena narrowed her eyes. "Try again." His gaze held hers, calm and unflinching. "I wanted to see you." The words landed heavier than she expected. Her throat tightened, but she masked it with sarcasm. "You know, stalking isn't a good look, even for a man in a $1,000 suit." Julian's chuckle was low, unbothered. "Relax, Selena. I wrote a check. That earns me at least one conversation." Her heart stuttered. A check. She glanced toward the donation box, suddenly aware of the thick envelope she'd noticed earlier. Her mind spun. He wasn't just intruding. He was investing. The evening blurred with chatter and polite laughter, but Selena found herself unable to shake him. Wherever she turned, Julian lingered, not hovering, but present, helping carry boxes to the storage room, listening intently as one of the kids explained his painting, even laughing softly at the baked goods table when a grandmother insisted he try her peach cobbler. And somehow, infuriatingly, he fit. When the event ended and parents collected their children, Selena ducked into the kitchen to catch her breath. She was scrubbing at a tray with unnecessary force when his voice floated in behind her. "You work hard for this place." She spun, water dripping from her hands. "You're not supposed to be back here." "Neither are half the kids raiding the leftover cookies," he said smoothly, leaning against the doorframe. "But you're not chasing them out." Selena bit back a retort. The truth was, his presence filled the small room, made it harder to breathe. "Why are you really here, Julian?" she asked finally. "You don't know me. You don't owe me anything." His eyes softened, shadows deep beneath them. "Maybe not. But you asked me once to pretend, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since." The silence that followed was thick, charged. Selena's chest rose and fell, her heart betraying her with its quickened pace. Later that night, after the fundraiser wrapped, Julian offered to drive her home. Selena refused at first, out of pride, out of stubbornness. But when she stepped outside and saw Anthony leaning against a black sedan across the street, that pride cracked. Her pulse spiked. Julian noticed instantly. "Him?" he asked, his voice edged. Selena clenched her jaw. "Just drive." He didn't hesitate. Within seconds, his car door was open, his hand steady at the small of her back as he guided her in. The leather seats smelled faintly of cedar and clean smoke. Anthony's eyes followed them, but Julian's glare, sharp, unwavering, met his through the windshield. A silent warning. A promise. As the car pulled away, Selena's hands trembled against her lap. "You didn't have to do that," she muttered. Julian's voice was calm, steady. "Yes, I did." The drive was quiet, the city lights streaking past the windows. Selena stared out, fighting the mix of relief and resentment swirling inside her. She hated needing anyone, hated that Anthony's presence still had the power to shake her. "You think you're saving me," she said finally, her voice low. "But you're not. I've been saving myself for years." Julian's grip on the wheel tightened, but his voice remained even. "Maybe. But doesn't mean you should have to do it alone." The words disarmed her more than she wanted to admit. When they reached her building, neither moved. The silence stretched, heavy with things unsaid. Selena turned to him at last. "You don't even know what you're getting into, Julian. Men like Anthony don't just disappear. They cling. They poison everything." Julian's jaw flexed. He thought of Lydia, of the night she'd begged him to believe her when she said she wasn't safe, of how he hadn't done enough. "I know exactly what men like that are," he said quietly. "And I won't let him near you again." The intensity in his voice sent shivers through her. Not fear, but something far more dangerous. Trust. That week, Julian became impossible to avoid. He appeared at the art center again, this time helping set up easels for the kids' class. He showed up at the local diner where Selena grabbed coffee, claiming coincidence but sliding into the booth across from her anyway. At first, Selena bristled, but little by little, resistance began to blur. She caught him smiling at a child's drawing, saw him roll his sleeves up to move heavy boxes without complaint, heard him laugh at a joke from one of the staff. Julian Hale, the billionaire, the stranger she had pulled into her storm, was becoming part of her orbit. And though she told herself she didn't want it, some part of her couldn't deny that it felt inevitable. Would you let someone into your world if they kept showing up in ways that mattered, or would you keep your walls high? Tell me what you'd do in the comments. And if you followed this story this far, ask yourself, are you just pretending to care, or are you really with us? Don't just listen. Subscribe now. Be part of the story. The week after the fundraiser blurred into a rhythm that both unsettled and comforted Selena. Every morning, she'd arrive at the art center expecting to find the usual. Kids dragging paintbrushes across paper, the smell of glue and crayons, the hum of old radiators. But now, there was often something more. Julian. One morning, he appeared carrying boxes of donated supplies. Another, he was crouched on the floor helping a boy tie his sneakers. The children, unfiltered and shameless, adored him instantly. They tugged on his sleeves, asked him questions, drew pictures for him. Selena pretended to be annoyed. She reminded herself that his world didn't belong to hers. And yet, She caught herself smiling when he laughed with the kids. She caught herself watching the way he softened in their presence, as though some locked-away part of him cracked open. But with closeness came risk. And risk meant the past pressing against her chest, demanding to be remembered. It was late one evening when the dam finally broke. The kids had gone home, the lights were dimmed, and the faint smell of turpentine lingered in the air. Selina stayed behind to clean brushes, sleeves rolled up, hair falling loose from her bun. Julian lingered too, claiming he wanted to help. He stood at the sink beside her, rinsing jars of paint with surprising care. The silence between them was thick, unspoken things humming beneath the scrape of bristles and the splash of water. At last, Julian broke it. "Anthony," he said quietly. "He's not just an ex, is he?" Selina froze. Her grip on the brush tightened, water dripping from her knuckles. For a moment, she considered deflecting, joking, dismissing, escaping. But when she looked up, Julian wasn't staring at her with pity. His gaze was steady, patient. Like he wasn't asking for gossip, but for truth. She set the brush down, her hands trembling slightly. "No," she whispered. Julian waited. Selina drew a breath, the words clawing their way out. He wasn't just controlling. He was dangerous. The kind of man who made you believe you were nothing without him. He'd smile in public, shake hands, charm everyone. But behind closed doors, her throat tightened. Behind closed doors, he decided who I was, what I wore, who I saw, whether I could even breathe without his permission. Her voice cracked, and she pressed a hand against the counter to steady herself. Memories flickered, Anthony's hand gripping her wrist too tightly, his voice low and venomous, the night she lay awake planning how to leave. "I finally walked away," she said, her chest rising and falling. "But men like him, they don't let go. They linger. They haunt. Sometimes I wonder if I'll ever really be free." The room was silent except for the dripping faucet. Selina braced herself for Julian's response. For judgment, for pity, for the shift in his eyes that always came when people learned too much. Instead, his hand reached across the sink, covering hers gently. Warm, steady, grounding. "You were brave," Julian said, his voice low. "You still are." The simplicity of the words undid her. Her eyes burned with unshed tears. But vulnerability is a two-way street, and Selina wasn't the only one carrying ghosts. She turned her gaze on him, narrowing slightly. "What about you?" Julian stiffened. "What about me? You sit in bars alone. You look like you're carrying the weight of 10 men. You don't smile unless someone forces it out of you. What are you hiding, Julian?" He looked away, jaw tightening. For a moment, she thought he'd shut down completely. But then his voice cracked in a way she hadn't heard before. "My sister," he said softly. Selina tilted her head. "Your sister." Julian's hands gripped the edge of the sink, his knuckles white. "Lydia. She was everything good. Stubborn, loud, brilliant. She wanted to be a musician, not part of the Hale Empire. I was supposed to protect her." His throat worked as he forced the words. "One night, I didn't. And she died." Selina's chest ached at the rawness in his tone. "A car accident," Julian continued, his voice hoarse. "She was driving home from a show. I should have been there. I should have stopped her. Instead, I was in a meeting, signing another deal, building an empire while my sister was. He swallowed hard. She was gone before I even got the call. His shoulders trembled, and for the first time, Julian Hale, the billionaire who carried himself like stone, looked breakable. I keep thinking, he whispered. If I had been there, if I had done something different, maybe she'd still. Stop, Selina cut in gently. She touched his arm, her fingers brushing his sleeve. You can't carry that forever. You loved her. That was enough. Julian's eyes closed, a single tear slipping down his cheek. He didn't wipe it away. They stood in silence, both of them cracked open, both of them seeing the other not as strangers or saviors, but as human. Selina whispered, almost to herself, maybe that's why I asked you. That night at the bar. Maybe I saw it, the loneliness in your eyes. Maybe I wasn't just asking for me. Julian opened his eyes, meeting hers. And maybe that's why I said yes. Because you reminded me I still had something to give. Their gazes locked, the air heavy with unspoken truths. The closeness between them that night lingered, fragile but real. Over the next days, they shared more. Selina told him about her mother's voice, always reminding her she was stronger than the men who tried to break her. Julian confessed how wealth had become a prison, isolating him from any kind of real human connection. Every story peeled back another layer. Every revelation bound them tighter. But beneath the bond lay a dangerous truth. Sometimes when wounds are exposed, the light heals them. Other times, it makes the scars burn brighter. Do you believe sharing your deepest pain with someone makes you stronger, or just more vulnerable? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if this story is touching places in your own memory, don't just sit with it in silence. Subscribe. Join us. Be part of something bigger than just listening alone. The week after their late-night confessions, something shifted between Selina and Julian. The air between them was still charged, still complicated, but softer somehow. They moved differently now, not as strangers pulled together by circumstance, not even as wary allies, but as two people daring to believe the other might understand them. For Selina, the shift was subtle but undeniable. She no longer tensed when Julian's shadow filled the art center doorway. She found herself listening for the sound of his voice, low and steady, as he helped the kids with projects. She caught herself smiling when his laugh, a laugh she had once thought buried, spilled out at some child's joke about glitter being art's confetti. For Julian, the shift was even more profound. The art center became a place where silence wasn't heavy, where the echo of Lydia's absence didn't haunt every corner. Selina's presence was grounding, not demanding, not artificial, but steady. She didn't want his money, his empire, his name. She wanted him as he was, scarred, imperfect, present. One evening, Selina invited him to join the kids for their Friday movie night. The classroom was transformed, blankets spread across the floor, popcorn in mismatched bowls, a projector flickering against a white wall. "You don't have to stay," Selina murmured as Julian lowered himself onto the floor beside her. "This isn't exactly the opera." Julian leaned back on his elbows, one eyebrow lifting. "You think I can't handle The Lion King?" Selina smirked. "We'll see." As the film played, the children huddled close, their laughter ringing through the room. When Mufasa's death scene came, Selina instinctively glanced at Julian, half expecting his composure to remain unshaken. But his jaw clenched, his eyes glistening faintly in the dim light. Selina nudged him with her elbow. "You okay there, tough guy?" He let out a quiet, humorless chuckle. "It hits different when you've lost someone." Selina's chest tightened, but instead of speaking, she simply reached for his hand. She laced her fingers with his, a gesture simple, childlike, yet profoundly intimate. Julian's breath hitched, but he didn't pull away. He held on. Later that night, after the children had gone home, Julian lingered to help Selina clean up. They worked side by side, stacking chairs and gathering stray popcorn kernels from the floor. "Do you ever let yourself rest?" he asked, watching her fuss over a pile of blankets. She shrugged. "Rest feels like weakness sometimes. Like if I stop moving, the past will catch me." Julian's gaze softened. "You're allowed to rest, Selina. You've already fought enough battles." His words disarmed her. She sat down heavily on one of the chairs, looking up at him. "And what about you? When do you rest?" He hesitated. "When I'm here." The admission stunned her. She hadn't realized she had become his refuge. The thought made her heart twist, both in fear and in longing. Over the next days, their bond deepened in small, unspoken ways. At the diner, Julian tried her favorite cherry pie and pretended not to like it, only to order a second slice. Selina laughed so hard she nearly choked on her coffee. At the art center, she caught him kneeling on the floor, letting a 6-year-old paint his tie with glitter glue. He wore the ruin proudly the rest of the day. One afternoon, when a thunderstorm knocked out the power, they lit candles in the classroom. Selina played a worn record of Nina Simone on an old turntable, and Julian surprised her by humming along, his voice low, surprisingly melodic. "You know Nina Simone?" she asked, raising a brow. "My sister loved her," he said simply. Selina reached across the candlelight, touching his hand. "Then she had good taste." It was in those moments, laughter over pie, glitter on expensive ties, shared silence to the sound of Nina Simone, that Selina realized something dangerous. She was starting to imagine a life where Julian stayed. A life where she wasn't constantly looking over her shoulder, where her heart wasn't just surviving, but beating freely. And Julian, though he fought it, felt something similar. For the first time since Lydia's death, the nights didn't feel unbearable. The mornings didn't feel empty. He found himself waking with a strange, tentative hope. One evening, after the kids left, Selina locked up the center. Julian lingered by the door, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled up. "You're different here," she said softly, leaning against the desk. He tilted his head. "Different how?" "You smile more. You laugh. You let people see you." Julian stepped closer, his gaze locked on hers. "Maybe it's because here, someone actually sees me." The air thickened. Selina's breath caught as he closed the space between them. For a moment, she thought he would kiss her. She wanted him to. Her heart raced, her lips parted. But Julian stopped just short, his breath warm against her skin. "You deserve more than a man who's still learning how to breathe," he whispered. Selina's throat tightened. She reached up, brushing a strand of hair from his face. "And maybe you deserve someone who reminds you you're alive." Their foreheads touched, a fragile, electric intimacy hanging in the air. They didn't kiss, not yet. But something deeper passed between them, a promise unspoken, a bond undeniable. That night, Selina lay awake in her apartment, Anthony's shadow still looming but dimmed by the memory of Julian's warmth. For the first time in years, the idea of love didn't feel like a trap. It felt like a possibility. And Julian, alone in his penthouse overlooking the city, found himself staring at his reflection. For once, he didn't see only the man who had failed his sister. He saw a man who might, just might, deserve another chance at life. Do you think love starts in the grand gestures, or in the quiet, ordinary moments, like holding hands during a movie? Share your thoughts in the comments. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening, as quietly and cruelly as a storm slipping over the horizon. The art center smelled of fresh paint, the children long gone. Selina was alone, reviewing grant paperwork at her desk, when the door creaked open. She looked up expecting Julian. He'd taken to stopping by unannounced, sometimes just to sit beside her in silence. But the man who stepped inside wasn't Julian. It was Anthony. Her pulse spiked instantly, dread coiling in her chest. He leaned against the doorway, smug as ever, his expensive cologne suffocating the air. "Selina," he drawled, always so determined to play savior to the broken little kids. Admirable. Pathetic, but admirable. Selina's hand clenched on the pen. "You need to leave." Anthony smirked, strolling further inside. "Funny thing, sweetheart. Do you know who I ran into today?" He paused, savoring her silence. "Julian Hale. The billionaire knight in shining armor you've been parading around. Did you know he's been scouting this block for redevelopment? Luxury condos. High-end retail. Guess what happens to your little art center when that deal goes through?" Her stomach dropped. She shook her head. "No. You're lying." "Am I?" Anthony grinned, pulling a folded document from his coat. "Saw the preliminary paperwork myself. Hale Enterprises. Right there in black and white." The room tilted. The air thickened. That night, when Julian arrived at the center, Selina was waiting with fire in her eyes and the papers clenched in her hand. "You used me," she spat, shoving the documents against his chest. "All this time, you pretended to care, but you were just buying me off while you prepared to bulldoze the one place I fought to protect." Julian froze, confusion flashing across his face. He glanced down at the papers, recognition dawning. His jaw tightened. "Selina, listen." "No." Her voice cracked, sharp with betrayal. "Don't you dare stand there and tell me this isn't what it looks like. Do you have any idea what this center means to me? To the kids. This is all they have, Julian. And you." Her breath caught. "You were just waiting to destroy it." Julian stepped forward, desperate. "I didn't know, Selina. The deal was signed months before I met you. I swear, I wasn't trying to hurt you." Her eyes burned. "But you were going to. Whether you knew it or not, whether you meant to or not, you were going to take away the only safe place I have." Julian reached for her, his voice raw. "Please, believe me. You changed everything for me. I'll call the board. I'll pull the deal. She pulled back, shaking her head violently. "You can't fix this with money. You can't fix me with money. That's all you know how to do. Throw cash at the cracks and hope they disappear." Her words cut sharper than she realized. Julian flinched as though she had struck him. "Is that what you think of me?" he asked quietly, his voice breaking. "That all I am is a checkbook with a name?" Selena's throat tightened. She wanted to take it back, wanted to say no, that wasn't all he was. But the anger, the fear, the years of being used and controlled screamed louder than her heart. "Yes," she whispered. "That's exactly what I think." The silence that followed was unbearable. Julian's chest rose and fell, his eyes dark with hurt. He nodded once, slow and deliberate, as though sealing something inside himself. "Then maybe I should leave you to someone who can give you what you really need," he said, his voice hollow. He turned, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the center, and for the first time since they'd met, he walked away. Selena's body trembled. She sank into a chair, tears burning her eyes, fury and heartbreak colliding inside her. She had wanted to hurt him, and she had. But why, then, did she feel as though she had carved out a piece of her own chest? For Julian, the night was a blur of neon and whiskey. He sat alone in his penthouse, staring out at the glittering skyline that had once felt like triumph but now mocked him with its emptiness. Selena's words replayed endlessly. "That's all you know how to do." He had tried. He had opened himself in ways he hadn't dared since Lydia. And still, it hadn't been enough. Maybe it never would be. He gripped the glass in his hand until it cracked, whiskey spilling across his palm. He didn't feel the sting, only the hollow ache of loss. For Selena, the following days were agony. She moved through the art center on autopilot, painting smiles for the children while her chest ached. At night, she lay awake replaying their fight, the look in Julian's eyes when she called him nothing but a checkbook. Her mother's voice echoed in her head. "Don't push away the ones who love you, Selena. Don't become so used to surviving that you forget how to live." But it was too late. She had pushed, and Julian was gone. Anthony, of course, seized the opening. He showed up again, smirking, trying to slide back into her life with sweet words and false promises. "See, I told you," he sneered. "Men like Hale aren't any different from me. They'll take what they want and leave you with nothing. But I can give you stability. I can protect you." Selena's stomach twisted. Once, those words had trapped her. But now, hearing them again, she felt something else. Anger. Defiance. For the first time, she realized she wasn't the same woman who had whispered, "Pretend," in a bar to hide from him. She shoved him back, her voice sharp. "I don't need protection from you. I need you to leave me alone." Anthony's mask slipped, his eyes flashing with rage. "You'll regret this," he hissed before storming out. But even as she stood strong, her chest ached with emptiness. Because the man she wanted by her side wasn't there. When trust is broken, even by accident, do you fight to repair it, or do you walk away before you get hurt again? Tell me in the comments. The days after their fight stretched into a silence that weighed heavier than any words. At the art center, Selena moved like a ghost. She laughed when the children laughed, but the sound never reached her eyes. At night, when the last light clicked off and she was left in the echoing emptiness of the classroom, she'd sit at the desk, staring at the stack of drawings the kids had given Julian. Little stick figures of him holding hands with them, colorful hearts scrawled around his head. She told herself to throw them out. She never did. At his penthouse, Julian moved like a machine. Meetings, calls, signatures on contracts. Everything that once defined him now felt hollow. His assistants noticed he no longer barked orders but spoke softly, distractedly. His glass office, which once gleamed with pride, now reflected only a man staring too long at the skyline, searching for something he couldn't name. Both were waiting, for anger to fade, for wounds to close, for something inside them to decide. But waiting was its own kind of torment. One night, Selina sat on the floor of her apartment, the hum of the refrigerator the only sound. She clutched an old shoebox in her lap. Inside were relics of her past, a bracelet her mother gave her, a photograph from her college graduation, a faded flyer from the first art workshop she had hosted. Beneath them all, buried deep, was an old keychain Anthony had once given her. For years, she had kept it, not out of love, but because it reminded her of survival. She held it now, the cheap metal cold in her palm, and realized how much of her life had been defined by men who wanted to control her story. Anthony through cruelty. Julian, unintentionally, through power. She whispered aloud, the words cracking in the silence. When do I get to write my own story? But then another voice rose inside her. Her mother's voice, firm and warm. Strength doesn't mean walking alone. Selina. Sometimes the bravest thing is letting someone walk beside you. Her throat tightened. Tears blurred her eyes. She hated that Julian's face rose with those words. She hated that part of her still longed for the steadiness of his hand, the warmth of his laugh, the way he had looked at her like she wasn't broken. She hated it, because it meant she still loved him. Meanwhile, in the Hale penthouse, Julian stood in Lydia's old music room. He hadn't stepped foot in it in years. Dust clung to the piano keys. A violin leaned forgotten in the corner. On the shelf sat Lydia's journal, worn from use. He opened it, flipping past pages filled with lyrics, sketches of stage outfits, notes about concerts. And then he found it, a page where she had scribbled a single sentence over and over. Don't let fear keep you from living. Julian sank onto the bench, the journal trembling in his hands. Selina's voice haunted him. That's all you know how to do. Maybe she was right. Maybe money had always been his crutch, his shield against vulnerability. Maybe he didn't know how to show love without trying to fix everything. But when he thought of her, the fire in her eyes, the way she held the children like they were her own, the way she had touched his hand in the candlelight, he knew he didn't want to live the rest of his life behind glass walls. Lydia had wanted him to live. Selina made him want to. For the first time in years, Julian sat at the piano and pressed a key. The sound rang out, shaky, imperfect, but alive. The universe, however, wasn't content to leave them in quiet reflection. 2 days later, the Art Center received a letter. Official letterhead. Hale Enterprises. Notice of potential redevelopment. Selina's chest tightened. She knew Julian had promised to pull the deal, but here it was in black and white, mocking her trust. Rage boiled up, but beneath it, heartbreak. She told herself it was proof she had been right all along. But then she noticed the date. The letter was drafted months ago, long before she had met Julian. And in the corner, handwritten in pen, were words that made her breath hitch. This deal is terminated. Protect this center at all costs. J.H. Her hands trembled. He had tried. That night, Selina walked through the city streets, the letter clutched to her chest. Neon lights blurred through her tears. She found herself at the edge of the river, the water dark and restless. She whispered into the night, "Do I forgive him? Do I risk it? Or do I keep building these walls until there's nothing left of me?" Behind her, a voice answered, not Julian's, not Anthony's, but one of the art center kids. A little girl, clutching her mother's hand, recognized her. "Miss Selina, are you coming tomorrow? We're painting the big mural." Selina forced a smile. "Of course." But inside, the question burned hotter. What good was a mural if her own heart remained blank? Across town, Julian faced his own crossroads. He sat with his board of directors, a glossy presentation about redevelopment flashing across the screen. Profits, projections, luxury condos. Julian stared at it, then shut the laptop with a decisive snap. "This deal is dead," he said firmly. The board erupted in protest. "It's millions of dollars." "I don't care," Julian cut in, his voice sharp. "Find another block. Another city if you have to. But this center stays." He stood, ignoring their objections, and walked out. For the first time, he felt light. That night, both Selina and Julian sat in their separate spaces, hearts pounding with the weight of decisions. Selina held the letter. Julian held Lydia's journal. Both knew what pride demanded: distance, safety, silence. Both knew what their hearts wanted: vulnerability, forgiveness, love. The choice was simple, yet terrifying. To risk everything, or lose the only thing that had ever felt real. The next evening, Selina dressed carefully. Not glamorous. Jeans, a simple blouse, paint still smudged on her fingers. Authentic. Real. She stood before the mirror, whispering to herself, "No more pretending." And for the first time since Anthony, she believed the words. She grabbed her coat and stepped into the night, her feet carrying her toward Julian's world. At the same time, Julian stood before his penthouse window, the city glittering beneath him. He took a deep breath, Lydia's words echoing in his mind. "Don't let fear keep you from living." He reached for his phone. His thumb hovered over Selina's number. For a long moment, he hesitated. Then, with a steady breath, he pressed call. The line rang. Once. Twice. Selina, already halfway across the city, stopped dead when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her heart in her throat. Julian Hale calling. Her hand trembled. She answered. Neither spoke at first. Just the sound of shared breath, heavy with everything unsaid. Finally, Julian whispered, "Selina, can I see you?" Selina closed her eyes, the tears finally spilling. "I was already on my way." When everything falls apart, is love about pride, or about choosing to be vulnerable one more time? If it were you, would you pick up the phone? Drop your answer in the comments. The cafe was nearly empty that night. Soft jazz floated through the speakers, candles flickering on wooden tables. Outside, the city lights shimmered across puddles left by an evening rain. Selina pushed open the door, her heart hammering. She spotted him instantly. Julian sat near the window, his suit jacket folded over the chair, his shirt sleeves rolled to the elbows. He looked exhausted, but when his eyes lifted and landed on her, something shifted. The weariness cracked, and warmth broke through. For a moment, neither moved. Then Selina crossed the room. She stopped at the table, clutching the letter in her hand. "I found this," she whispered, sliding it toward him. Julian glanced down, recognition sparking. He looked back up at her, his voice low. "I meant every word. I ended the deal." Her throat tightened. "I know." Silence stretched. The cafe seemed to fade away until there was only them, caught in the fragile space between heartbreak and healing. Selina sank into the chair across from him. She didn't fidget. She didn't hide. For once, she let herself just be. "I was cruel," she admitted. "I said things I didn't mean. I was scared. Julian, you reminded me of everything I'd lost. Control, trust, safety. And instead of admitting that, I attacked you." Julian shook his head. "You weren't wrong. I have used money to fix everything in my life. It was easier than facing the pain. But with you," his voice faltered, "with you, I didn't want to fix. I just wanted to stay. And I didn't know how to show that." Her chest ached. "You did show me. In 100 small ways. I just couldn't see it because I was too busy waiting for the hurt." Julian reached across the table, hesitating. Selina let his hand rest over hers, their fingers trembling but entwined. "For the first time in years," he whispered, "I want something money can't buy. And it terrifies me. But losing you terrifies me more." Tears welled in Selina's eyes. She squeezed his hand. "Then don't lose me." A smile flickered through Julian's tears. He leaned in, his voice breaking with memory. "Do you remember what you said to me that night at the bar?" Selina let out a shaky laugh. "Pretend you're with me." Julian shook his head softly. "I never pretended, Selina. Not for a second." Her breath caught. In that moment, every wall she had built, every fear she had clung to, cracked and crumbled. She saw the man before her, not the billionaire, not the fixer, but the broken, brave soul who had chosen her. And she chose him back. She stood, pulling him up with her. No grand speeches, no dramatic pause. Just raw, aching need. She kissed him, and the kiss was everything. Apology, forgiveness, promise. He cupped her face, his forehead pressing to hers as though anchoring himself to the truth. Around them, the cafe disappeared. Time disappeared. For the first time in years, both felt whole. Later, they walked hand in hand along the riverwalk, the city lights shimmering on the water. The chill air bit at their cheeks, but warmth burned between them. Julian spoke first. "I want to help the art center, but not with money. Not just money. I want to be there. To read stories to the kids. To sweep the floors if that's what you need. Will you let me?" Selina squeezed his hand, her smile soft. "You already gave them something money can't. You gave them yourself. That's all they ever needed. That's all I ever needed." They stopped beneath a bridge, the city's hum above them. Julian cupped her cheek. "Then from here on out, no more pretending. No more walls. Just us. As we are." Selina nodded, her eyes shimmering. "As we are." Weeks later, the art center buzzed with energy. Children splashed paint on the walls, laughter bouncing off the halls. Selina directed them, her voice ringing with joy. And there, in the corner, was Julian, not in a suit, not hidden behind wealth, but in a plain shirt, kneeling on the floor helping a boy build a cardboard castle. The sight made Selina's chest ache, not with pain, but with gratitude. Anthony tried once more to barge into her world, his bitterness sharp, but this time Selina didn't flinch. Julian was beside her, calm but unyielding, and together they told Anthony to leave. For good. Selina realized she had finally taken her power back, not alone, but alongside someone who respected it. One evening, after the children had gone home, Selina and Julian stood outside the mural they had helped the kids finish. Bright colors stretched across the wall, hands reaching for the sky, a sunrise breaking over the city. At the bottom corner, a little girl had written in shaky letters, "Love builds, fear breaks." Julian wrapped his arm around Selina's shoulders. "They're wiser than both of us," he murmured. Selina leaned against him, her smile glowing. "Maybe, but I think we finally caught up." Months later, in that same Chicago bar where it all began, Selina and Julian sat side by side. The night was loud with laughter and clinking glasses. A man walked past, eyeing Selina a little too long. She felt Julian tense beside her. Selina turned, her eyes playful, and whispered in his ear, "Pretend you're with me." Julian chuckled, pulling her close. "No pretending this time." And with that, what began as a desperate whisper had become their truth. Love at last, love unexpected, love that saved them both. If someone once broken chose you, flaws, scars, and all, would you have the courage to choose them back? Share your thoughts in the comments. If this story made you feel even a flicker of hope or warmth, don't just leave it behind when the video ends. Hit subscribe, because stories like this remind us that love, even in the darkest places, is still possible. And maybe, just maybe, the next one could be your story.
Thank you for watching this story to the end. If you enjoyed this story, you will surely love the next one. It's as crazier and more intriguing as you can ever imagine. So do check it out. Click on the image showing on your screen right now to watch the next one.